Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me? A warm welcome to everyone here in Westminster Hall and also to those of you watching on live stream. It's fantastic to have such a great turnout. This is wonderful. And I know we've got a few more people still signing in, so there'll be a few more coming in. It's a delight to have you here for Richard's presentation today. I also want to send a special shout out to all of you at Presbyterian Homes in Edina and also Friendship Village who are joining us via live stream. It's wonderful that your communities have arranged to let you join us this way. Before introducing our honored guest, Margaret, will you say a prayer for us?
So, good morning, welcome Richard, welcome all who are attending in person and online. I'm Margaret Fox, I'm Associate Pastor for Adult Ministries here, and Third Age is one of the ministries that I support. I love the variety of programs that come through Third Age. We had somebody come from the FBI to talk about cybersecurity, and it was this fascinating, engaging presentation. I thought, how could anybody top this? And then the very next month, we had somebody come in to talk about music of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, complete with video clips and rock and roll, and it was just this swinging good time. And now we have a very full house to welcome Richard Leider here to talk about the Path of Purposeful Aging. In the Third Age program, some of our events are about the question of living a purposeful life in this phase of life, and some of our events are just ways to learn and grow, because learning and growth is just an ongoing important part of this time in life. So I am delighted for today's event, which I believe will give us an opportunity to do some of both of those things. So let's open with a word of prayer. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for the path that you call us on in our lives. We thank you for gathering us here in this moment. Open our ears to hear and our minds and our hearts to grow. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. All right, I'll now invite Reverend Kathy Michael up here to come and introduce our speaker.
I am grateful to be here to introduce Richard Leider, who is my neighbor and also my friend, and it is a joy to be here with you today. I read Who Do You Want to Be When You Grow Old some months ago, quite a few months ago. It's all underlined and marked in the margins, and I bought copies for both of my children who are middle age, because they're going to grow old one day too. And it has been a book that has been an inspiration and also a challenge to me to live life with adventure and with purpose. Why do you get up in the morning? Internationally best-selling author, coach, and keynote speaker Richard Leider has pioneered the way we answer that question. Widely viewed as a thought leader in the global purpose movement, his work is featured regularly in the media resources, including PBS Public Television and NPR Public Radio. His PBS special, which I hope some of you have seen, I enjoyed it myself, The Power of Purpose, was viewed by cities across the United States. He has taken his purpose message to all 50 states, Canada, and to 4 continents. People are growing older all over the world, and it's an important thing to talk about. All along the way, Richard has written 11 books, including 3 bestsellers, which have sold over 1 million copies. Repacking Your Bags, which is on my shelf, The Power of Purpose are considered classics in the personal growth field. And his latest book, Who Do You Want to Be When You Grow Old, defines the power of purposeful aging. Richard is the founder of Inventure, The Purpose Company, a firm created to guide individuals to live, work, and lead on purpose, focus, and purpose. He is ranked by Forbes as one of the top 5 most respected coaches and is a contributing author to many coaching books. He has provided coaching to many organizations, Ameriprise, Habitat for Humanity, Mayo Clinic, the National Football League, and my very favorite, the U.S. Department of State, which maybe could use a little bit more coaching these days. Richard holds a master's degree in counseling and is a national certified counselor and a national certified master career counselor. He is a senior fellow at the University of Minnesota's acclaimed Erlbakken Center for Spirituality and Healing and an education fellow with the Retirement Income Institute. For over 30 years, Richard has led adventure expeditions and safaris in Tanzania. He has a heart left in Africa, where he has been on the board of Dorobo Fund for Tanzania. This is a group that he has co-founded with his wife Sally and others to provide village conservation and women's education. He has climbed Kilimanjaro how very many times? More? 8 times. I was thinking too many times to count. Well, 8 would be too many times for me, but nevertheless, he is an adventurer himself. He also loves cheese. He's also a very kind man. And it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce to you Richard Leider.
Thank you, Kathy, for a very generous introduction. And thank you for being here today. It's always a privilege to be with a group like this, and it's a privilege to age as well. So, spoiler alert, you're getting older. However, the question is, are you growing older? You know, why do they say growing old? Because growing is, as Margaret has said, and as Kathy has supported, is what we're talking about here. And so I've been looking at this purpose message and this purpose concept under, as a practice, as a student of, and as a person myself who's aging. So I'd like to share with you some things I've learned about both the path and the practices of living and purposefully and aging purposefully. I'm sure some of you have a cell phone, right? I have a colleague who has a cell phone. I have mine on stun or on off now. Hopefully yours is on off. But my colleagues, when you call him and you leave a message, he says this: at the sound of the tone, please leave your answer to life's 2 eternal questions. Who are you and what do you want? Common questions, but they're with us for life, not just younger life, midlife, but throughout our lives. And the answer to that, I believe, in a nutshell, is this: what we want is to belong and to matter. If you summarize it simply, we want to belong. We want to feel like we're part of community, family, different kinds of associations of like this. And we want our lives to matter. I've interviewed thousands of people, I've written about it, and I've never met one person who didn't say, I want my life to matter. Mattering matters. So let me start by saying that purpose is not a luxury. Purpose is not a luxury. Purpose is fundamental to health, to healing, to happiness, and ultimately to longevity. If I said to you right now that at the end of this morning's session that we're going to add 7.5 years, 7 to 10 years to your life, would you sign up? Yeah. Well, what we now know, because they can now measure it in certain ways, that purpose does add longevity. But what we're really talking about is quality of life here, not just length of life. So that's where I want to go with this. What I'd like to do is what I would call a purpose checkup. You know, you might take your car in for a checkup, you might do a financial checkup, you might do a physical checkup. So I want to do just a brief, what I would call a purpose checkup. If you have a pulse, you have a purpose. You have a reason for being here, a reason to wake up in the morning and answer the question, you know, why? One of the people that I really like as an essayist is E.B. White. He said this. He said, "I arise in the morning, torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day." Well, go back. Save the world doesn't literally mean save the world, but it means to serve in certain ways. And I actually picked this up on the table out there when I got here a bit earlier. It's a little bookmark, and it says, "Why we serve." I think it's in our DNA as human beings to serve. And we all have, everybody here is an experiment of one. We all do that in our own ways, but it's serving is a cradle to grave process. And that's really the power of purpose in a nutshell. So it's fundamental. And the other thing, as we launch into this, to probably a big sigh of relief to some of you, I want to talk about purpose with a big P and purpose with a little p. So purpose with a big P is like saving, so to speak. You know, doing something grand and noble with one's life and one's time. That's okay. That's a good thing. It's about having a cause, or something that you get behind. And purpose with a little p is making a dent every day in someone else's life in a positive way. Small p purpose. You know how many moments there are in a day? 1,440. So part of that you'll be sleeping probably, but if you reduce that sum, every one of those is a purpose moment, a chance to make a difference in another person's life. So it's the small p purpose that I want to talk about, because that's the why do you get up in the morning, daily practices type of thing that every one of us has the opportunity to work with. So I have some slides. This happens to be a slide called a baobab tree in Africa, and it's the tree of life, they call it in Africa. And since Kathy mentioned going to Africa for all these years, I first went there. I was on the board of trustees of Outward Bound. You know Outward Bound? And so we climbed Kilimanjaro to raise money. You know, if you got to the top, you raise a certain amount of funds for Outward Bound. And so that's how I got there in the first place. And I fell in love the minute I touched the tarmac at Kilimanjaro Airport. Something shifted. There was just something about the odors, the people, the things that I wanted to come back. And I started to go back, and I don't climb Kilimanjaro anymore. 8 is 7 more than you should do. But I've taken 100 people to the top, and it's 19,340 feet, and it's enough. I can still do it, but I don't want to do it anymore. But I do want to sit under the baobab tree with elders and learn what they have learned. I wrote a book a while back called Claiming Your Place at the Fire. What that means is that I sat around under the tree with elders in a tribe called the Hadza. They're hunter-gatherers. They've been around for 75 to 100,000 years. They call them the original people in certain ways. So I'm sitting around the fire with these elders, and I'm interviewing them because about elderhood and about aging and things like this. And I noticed that the wisest of the elders sat the closest to the fire. Now, I just figured this out with translator and things like that. And not the oldest of the elders, but the wisest. And I asked myself, where will I be sitting? Will I be sitting close to the fire or far away? What kind of wisdom, what kind of life have I led in certain ways? So one of these elders, his name is Kampala, in his early 80s, which is very old for a hunter-gatherer, and he said, Richard, you've been asking us a lot of questions. You mind stepping aside, and I want to ask you a question. I said, sure. So he said, Richard, do you know what the 2 most important days in your life are? And what would have you said? That's what I said, birth and death. And he kind of went, ugh. You know, you come over here in an airplane, you came out here in a Land Rover, you're sleeping in this tent, you've got this backpack, we live in these grass huts, and it comes out he's never been more than about 50 kilometers from where we're sitting. And I said, well, Kampala, what are the two most important days? And he says, the day you're born, and infant mortality is a big deal over there, and the day that you determine why you're born, what you're here to do. Then he went on to share that as elders, that's their job, is to figure out why, and your role, because he said the only way we've survived is through sharing. And we're a total sharing or serving culture, and and they have no leaders, they have no shamans, they have just complete sharing with each other. Men and women equal. When they have a meeting, they argue like cats and dogs, men and women equally, and then they walk out holding hands, agreeing on where they're going to go. So that's the kind of the story behind the baobab and that. So where I want to go is this question: what do you do? This is a really bad question. And as we age, sometimes what do we do becomes, I don't know, how do you answer that question? Is it just, well, I'm retired, or I'm just this, or that? And so it's a question that if anyone asks, don't ask this to other people, because it pigeonholes people. It puts them in a box. It puts them in a role. Ask people, what are they passionate about? What do they really care about? Things like that. And another word, while I'm talking about the linguistics here of purpose, is don't use this word anymore. Still. S-T-I-L-L. Oh, you're still doing whatever. I get this all the time. I'll be, in a few months, I'll be 79, and people are saying, and you're still writing? And you're still trekking in Africa? And I said, well, who made up the rules of how I'm supposed to do things? Well, there's this age 65, and there's all these other rules. And I said, those are your rules, not mine. And so purposeful living and aging is about being authentically you. And so words like still, which is 5 nasty letters, often define us as being wrong, being on the wrong side of the truth, or whatever like that. And so I like the idea of purposeful living because it is about being an experiment of one. You get to do the choosing. So let me share with you a little bit about that. So what on earth are you here for? What's the point of the exercise? In the early 1900s, what the average life expectancy was in the U.S. Anybody know? 47. Now we've added about 3 to 4 decades to life, God willing, and genetics and a lot of other things, but also your behavior, what choices you make with your life in certain ways. And so what we're on earth to do, let's start with the end in mind here and say, here's the answer to today's quiz. Why do you get up in the morning? Here's the answer. It's only 2 words. So if you came here to find a purpose, here it is. Grow and give. That's it. That's the bottom line. Universally, having studied this across the world, getting up in the morning, growing and giving each and every day. So I'm going to challenge you at the end of this, when I'm done, to take out a Post-it when you get home, assuming you might have a Post-it somewhere at home. Maybe we have them here someplace. But on that Post-it, write grow and give. And put that Post-it on your mirror. And when you get up in the morning, ask yourself, how am I going to grow and give today? And at the end of the day, before you go to bed at night, ask yourself, how did I do? Did I grow and give today? If you do that for 5 days, you'll have a felt sense of what this purpose message is all about. Not just as a concept, not just as a basic, perhaps, truth or reality, but also as a practice. Because purpose is a verb. Purpose is a verb, and it's something that we act on, we do, and growing and giving is the solution in a nutshell. So I'll remind you at the end here of growing and giving, but that's basically the bottom line here of purpose, and when I coach people along the way. So why are we here? Spoiler alert number 2, I think to serve. And the way we do that is by growing and giving. So let's look at what's underneath all that along the way. So do science and faith agree? The answer is unequivocally yes. We were talking about back here with the Lees and others about the American Academy of Neurology. Right across the street from the Guthrie Theater is that beautiful limestone building called the world headquarters for the worldwide headquarters now, but it's called the American Academy of Neurology. I've been working with them for a decade or more, looking at the brain and purpose, the brain and science, the brain and faith, and things like that. And one of the people that I interviewed, his name is Dr. Majid Fatoui at Johns Hopkins University. He's a member of the American Academy of Neurology, held up this pill. He said, "Richard, you see this pill?" And I said, "Yep." He said, "Would you buy it?" And I said, "Why would I buy it?" And he said, "Well, let me give you some reasons why you should buy this pill." He said, "First of all, it reduces the effects of Alzheimer's and gives you a better quality of life. It reduces the effects of macroscopic stroke by 41%. It helps with sleep apnea and sleep disorders, and it adds 7 to 10 years to your life." He said, "So you want to buy it? Do you want to buy it?" Yeah, of course. I said, "How much?" He says, "Free." I said, "Free," and he said, "It's purpose." We now can measure purpose in the brain, purpose and quality of life, and we're now, where science and faith cross over. Our mindset, faith, our mindset, our point of view about the choices we make in life, our values, our beliefs, and things like that. So, just 2 weeks ago, I was in Costa Rica, and I was teaching at a place called Blue Spirit, which is a conference center there. And one of the people that I was teaching with at this Blue Spirit Conference Center co-won the Nobel Prize for Medicine. Her name is Dr. Alyssa Epel, and she, with Elizabeth Blackburn, Alyssa Epel with Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, won the Nobel Prize for Medicine for something they call the telomere effect. Do you know what a telomere is? Anybody here know what a telomere is? So, are you physicians? You just know. Okay. Well, on the end of, like if you have a shoelace, at the end of a shoelace there's that little plastic thing. Well, guess what? There's one of those little things on the end of every chromosome in your body. And it's called a telomere. And if that telomere gets sick or shrinks, you age faster and you get potentially sick. If that telomere grows or is healthy, you tend to live longer and healthier. And they won the Nobel Prize because purpose, they found out, is fundamental to telomere survival and growth. And so having a reason to get up in the morning, as I said, is not a luxury. It's a mindset of how you serve or how you grow and give and things like that. And so it's fundamental, and as they say at the American Academy, it's not going to be long before your doctor is going to give you a prescription that says, "I've done as much as I can do with medicine and nutrition and exercise and surgery. You have to change your mindset." And how it's not just put on a smile or a happy face. It's purpose for the sake of what, essentially. And its purpose is always beyond ourselves. It's always about our connection with others in certain ways. So, do science and faith agree? I took a year off of running my company, and I went to United Theological Seminary to study purpose in world religions for a year. And what I found is that every religion, and Margaret may have something to say about this later, but every major or minor religion has purpose as part of its fundamental structure and beliefs in certain ways. So if you're a skeptic, park it for a few more minutes while we look at some practices here about purpose. I met with this, how many of you know Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning? Wow, that's a lot of hands that went up here. When I got out of graduate school, I was trying to figure out what, as a counselor, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. You'd think you'd maybe get a clue when you're in counseling graduate school, but I had studied this guy, Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, and I found on the bulletin board at the school that I was at that he was going to be actually doing a workshop in San Diego as part of raising money for a Viktor Frankl Institute in San Diego. I went there, begged, borrowed, and stole my way in to spend a week with Viktor Frankl. And it was a fortuitous encounter that changed my life in terms of my viewpoint of my belief. If you don't know about Man's Search for Meaning, the bottom line is this, that he is a Jewish psychiatrist, neurologist in Vienna, Austria. He had trained with Freud and Adler and Jung and other famous European thinkers at the time, but he taught something called logotherapy, meaning therapy, to physicians. But at the height of his work, the Nazis came in, they took him, they took his grandparents, his parents, and his pregnant wife Tilly and his siblings in a boxcar to Auschwitz. They all died. He survived. 3.5 years later, he got out of concentration camp, and he weighed 87 pounds. He went back to Vienna, and he healed. And as he healed, he sat down and wrote Man's Search for Meaning, one of the most famous books in terms of readers, in 9 days, about what he'd learned. And the bottom line for me was this: the last of the human freedoms is choice. It's to choose, in spite of the adversity you have, to choose what you want to do in that moment. And he talked about waking up in the morning with the will to live, giving others hope, giving others a crust of bread, a kind word, something that would in some way help them all to survive. And so purpose is really about that choice and that hope and that will to live. And so I learned a lot, and he wrote another, he didn't actually write this book, but while he was writing Man's Search for Meaning, he was also giving talks about what he learned to broad audiences beyond physicians. And so there's a book out now called Say Yes to Life in Spite of Everything. I love that title. Are you saying yes to life in spite of whatever it is that is in front of you? Because he talked about resilience. And resilience comes from not just physical resilience, but emotional, spiritual resilience in ways that help us not only survive, but to thrive in certain ways. So between stimulus and response, there's the freedom to choose. I don't know if you believe that, but that's the power of purpose, is that choice that we make in that between whatever is going on in our lives. So I've been interviewing people, and I did for this new book that Kathy generously held up, and hers has got all kinds of things in it, but I've been interviewing people over the age of 65 for many, many years, and asking them if, what have they learned as, if we had elders passing back wisdom, what have our elders learned that I can pass on? So 3 things keep coming up over and over again when I interview people, and they are these 3 things. Number 1, if you could live your life over again, they'll say, I wish I would have been more reflective. More reflective means stepping back and looking at what matters, what's important, the big picture, so to speak. And I said, well, when did you do that? And 99% said during crisis. Physical crisis, an emotional crisis, a spiritual crisis, whatever. Then we had to step back and look at, what have I been doing, and what could I do? What are my choices in the matter? So part of my message and my methodology is to help people reflect, to step back and look at the big picture. This book, for example, starts out with what's called the long conversation. My co-author, David Shapiro, and I, we've written 6 books together, 3 bestsellers. This is our most recent, and we think our best. And it starts out with the long conversation that we started a long time ago, but we generated over here at Target Field. We were both baseball fans. We were at a baseball game at Target Field when the Twins were really good. And and all of a sudden it started raining. And they brought the tarps out, and David lives in Seattle, so he wasn't here for, ever. So we didn't, this was our one chance to see a game. So we're sitting there, and it's raining, so we go get a beer, we go underneath, and we're talking about aging and our own aging, etc. And then one thing led to another, and the game was called. And we had to leave several hours later after a long conversation that we then continued to build in this book. The end of the book, the last section of this book, is called The Ultimate Conversation. What happens at the end? It's about dying. It's about the end of life, and it's about end in mind. I just did a program, I don't know if any of you were there, with Kathy Wurzer, Minnesota Public Radio. She's created this project called End in Mind, how to have a vibrant conversation about the end of life in order to inform living more purposefully and fully while alive. And so the last section of this book is about the end in mind, or about the ultimate conversation. So the point is that reflection, that's what we're doing right now. And we're a doing culture. We're, what do I do now with this? Second thing is that with people over 65 was they said they would have taken more risks the second time around. And the risks they would take were about relationships, number one, and about work, number two. People wish they would have been more effective in their relationships, more effective as a parent, more effective as a friend, more effective as a boss or colleague and things like that. Just knowing that in the end, or not at the end, throughout life, relationships matter, and sometimes they get parked in favor of other activities that, busyness is not just a thing that happened now, with technology and people always being on with, you notice this? I mean, my wife and I were in a restaurant the other day, and there was people sitting next to us. I don't think they talked to each other the whole time. They were just on their phones. I don't know who they were texting or doing, but, and so we were having a conversation, parking our technology, but busyness today is hijacking the human moment. And people are talking more about the richness of that human moment and risk-taking, being more courageous, having courageous listening and courageous conversations and things like that. And the second thing is work. Work occupies about 60% of our life's time when you add it up. It's a big block anyway. And oftentimes when people retire, all of a sudden that goes away. And all of a sudden their identity goes away, and their time structure goes away, and their passion for what they're doing goes away. So what do we do in this next phase of life, which I'll talk about now? The third thing is, I've already mentioned, and that is mattering matters. Everyone I've interviewed has said the same thing. I want my life to matter. And they don't say necessarily legacy talk, but it's in our DNA to serve. It's in our DNA to want our lives to matter, and that's in many ways why we're here. So one of the people I interviewed is an astronaut, and did you see, by the way, in the news who just got married? Buzz Aldrin gets married at 93, and there's this lovely picture, and he said, it's like eloping as teenagers. He talks about it, and well, he was the second person to put his footprint on the moon. But what I learned in interviewing some astronauts and the NASA space program is this. They call it the overview effect. Have you ever heard of that before? The overview effect. The overview effect is kind of like the paradox of purpose. They start as technologists and as scientists and as pilots, etc., to go, let's say, to the moon or go into space. And they come back after seeing this. They went as technologists and came back as humanitarians. Why? Because they saw something that is bigger than them. They saw millions of stars out there. They saw. I just read. I don't know if it's bogus or not. That they've discovered a radio signal like 9 billion miles out right now. I mean, who knows? But when they see this blue orb out there, they come back wanting to do something to make it work, and they want their lives to matter. And so many of the astronauts, the overview effect, changed the game when they came back. They created foundations. They did things that were about serving in certain ways or making a difference. So the overview effect, purpose is a verb. It's what you do when you go back, not just what you learned when you're out there. And that's what wisdom is, I think. Seeing the big picture and knowing what weight to give things in certain ways is my definition of wisdom. So this is the arc of life that I grew up with. How about you? This is the arc. If you can't see it from the back, the bottom line, the vertical up is personal growth. I talked about grow and give. It's about grow and give. Then there's childhood, adolescence, adulthood, retirement, old age. It's the 3 boxes of life. It's the linear life. Grow up, grow old, learn, earn, retire, and die. And this is what I call a deficit model of aging. A deficit model of aging. It looks at the second half of life as a downward slope. Well, I just spent 5 years as the founder and the curator of AARP's Life Reimagined Institute in Washington, D.C. You probably never heard of it, but this is their think tank on the future of aging, challenging this model because we've added a lot of things, including health and decades to life. I grew up with this model and as my mental model of aging. What I'm trying to support here with you is a pro-life model of aging, not an anti-aging model of sorts. Do you remember the book Passages? You know how many years ago Passages came out? 47 years ago. And it was on the New York Times bestseller list for years. And Gail Sheehy took that information from a project that I also was part of called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. That I had a sabbatical thanks to the local Bush Foundation here with the Harvard Study of Adult Development looking at aging and the good life. And so Passages, but also, did you ever play the Game of Life, the board game, the Game of Life? You know when that came out? In the 1800s, the late 1800s. It's been changed many times in terms of its aesthetics and its same old model. You look at it today, it's the same old model about retirement and things like that. Kind of a deficit model of aging. So this is the linear life that many people now are not living and not wanting to live. So before I move and show you the arc, the new arc that we discovered at the Life Reimagined Institute, which will not be a surprise to you, but maybe a good mental model or visual for you to look at. But just take a pause for a moment here and turn to somebody here that you don't know and just 30 seconds answer this question. What did you want to be when you grew up? And how did that work out? Just take a minute and pause. We're reflecting. We're just reflecting, but just turn to someone you don't know and just say, so what did you want to be when you grew up? Take one more minute. Okay, thank your partner, and let's get back together. So, sometimes, regardless of how it turned out or didn't, the way you hoped or expected, we ended up at a certain in midlife or later life living what we call a default life. There's a whole chapter in this book on are you living a default life? Am I living a default life? It's kind of repeating yourself over and over again without growing. Repeating your relationships over and over without growing, and your choices. And so default, I say it's like looking in the rearview mirror and living off of history and living after the past. And you ask somebody, kind of a standing joke between my wife Sally and I is that I will say, my worst case scenario is to be on an airplane sitting next to a former anything. We're all former somethings. We all came from somewhere. But I'd say, well, what are you passionate about? What are you thinking about now? What surprises you? What do you care about? I was, not too long ago, I was backstage before a program on the East Coast with a guy named Richard Warman. He's an architect, but he's the founder of TED. You know TED? TED Talks? TED? He's the founder of TED in the early 80s. He sold it after a while to who owns it now, Chris Anderson, but he was the founder of it. And I said, how did you do this? He said, I created the ultimate dinner party. Who do I want to invite and ask from technology, entertainment, design? This was pre-internet, where you just couldn't get, and what did they talk about? And he said, out of that came TED. And if it was a boring conversation, I would end it and say, okay, next, and not invite him back. I said, and then he said, well, Richard, what are you going to be talking about today? We didn't know each other, and I said, purpose. And he kind of went, ugh. And I said, well, he's older than me. I said, well, what are you going to talk about? He said, I'm going to talk about curiosity. And he said, TED was founded on my curiosity, on the curiosity of all these other people. Millions, billions of people watch TED Talks all the time. Why? Because they're curious about something. So and he says, don't you think that curiosity drives purpose? If you're not curious about yourself, and you're not curious about that other person, you're probably not living purposefully or as thriving or as flourishing or as alive as you could be. And I said, well, what's your definition of curiosity? He said this. He said, it's finding or exploring or observing the extraordinary in the ordinary. And I said, can you give me an example of that? So you get it? Seeing the extraordinary in another person or in a situation or in a place and in everyday life. That doesn't have to be any big discovery. And so we're sitting in the green room and there's a fruit bowl there with bananas. He picks up the banana and he said, you go to Africa all the time, I heard. Do you ever watch chimps eat bananas? And I said, well, I think so, yeah. And he said, well, how about you? Do you like it? He said, take a bite of this one. I think it's pretty good. So I start, with the stem coming out, peeling it back, and he laughs and he says, obviously you're not very curious. If you didn't see the way chimps eat bananas, they flip the banana and they peel it from the bottom. To this day, I never eat a banana. I love bananas. I never eat a banana without peeling it from the bottom. As a reminder of just the simple act, the everyday act of curiosity in certain ways. So one other thing, then we'll look at this arc and we'll see what kind of practice we can do and then end it. I was in Denver a few months ago, and from the Denver airport, I got an Uber driver to take me downtown. Do you ever go on Uber? You know Uber, right? So I get into this Uber, and he says, where are you going? And I told him the Moxie Hotel in Cherry Creek, a really hip hotel. Usually people that are like half my age are there. And I said, I want to be in an intergenerational hotel, place where lots of people are doing things at different ages. So I stay at the Moxie. He says, what are you going to talk about? You're going to give a speech tomorrow at Denver University at this Aging Institute. I said, I'm going to talk about aging, and I'm going to talk about the Path of Purposeful Aging. And grabs the rearview mirror and he turns and he says, "Do you know how old I am?" I said, "I mean, you don't answer that, because if you go too young or you go too old, then you're in trouble either side of that." So I said, "I don't really know, but how old are you?" And he smiles and he said, 81. And I said, 81, and you're an Uber driver. When did you start? And he said, "I don't know, a couple of years ago." He said, I retired late, but my wife died. And I was sitting on the couch too long watching TV. And I don't know if you ever see this, but the average retiree watches TV 47 hours a week. Not a good thing for health. I mean, it's fine if there's programs you want to see and all that, but a lot of it's mindless. He said, I was dying on the vine from the inside out. I love people. I used to be in a job where I was active with people all the time. I love being an Uber driver because I can do it on my own time. I meet interesting people, and I get to travel around, and it gives me a reason to get up in the morning beyond myself. I don't need the money, but I need the social interaction. And as you know, the current Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, came out with a book last year called Together. And he said the greatest epidemic in America today is loneliness. Loneliness. And isolation is fatal. Being alone. You could be here in a crowd like this and feel lonely or feel alone. Isolation is fatal. And this guy, this driver said, and I said, well, I said, the one thing I'll tell you is I'm going to talk about the big P and the little p. And the big P is having a big cause. He says, no, I don't have that. The little p, every day I get all these purpose moments to make a difference in someone's life, to compliment them, to help them, to interact, to grow and give, so to speak. So here's one of my teachers, my Uber driver, going like that. So here's the arc that I've been studying now for a long, long time. And personal growth on the left, going up, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, new life stage, maybe retirement, and then old age. And they call that last stage, by the way, compressed morbidity. We want to live fully all the way and a short death, type of thing. But you see the curve in the middle there, the bend in the middle? They call that the U-curve of happiness. There's worldwide science studies right now. You can Google this yourself and get it. The U-curve of happiness shows that the most unhappy time in people's lives across the world is in midlife. The happiest time, guess when? The two happiest times are that at top of the adolescence into adulthood, going from adolescence to adulthood, and then from adulthood to elderhood. So that's what we're talking about here. What are the practices of elderhood? Leaving midlife and not looking in the rearview mirror anymore, but looking in the windshield. The windshield is way bigger than the rearview mirror, as you know, in your automobile. So this new life stage is this what this book is about, and what are the practices and the stories of people who are living in this new life stage. Everybody here's an experiment of one. We all have our way of being. But does it surprise you to see that the happiest time of life is in the second half? We grow up twice. The first time we grow up is from adolescence to adulthood. Then there's this midolescence. And midlife is like midolescence for many people. You know what adolescence was like? Your body changed. Well, did your body change? Huh? And your emotions, your choices in certain ways are revisited in a longer life, in a midlife. I used to do a lot of work in what is called midlife crisis. I now have a chapter in this book called late life crisis, because people who didn't do their work in midlife to really look at what's possible often have a later life crisis where they're still lonely, they're still have different feelings about how they're aging or not. So, are you living a good life? Here's my definition of a good life. My co-author, David Shapiro, and he's a philosophy professor. He's a tenured philosophy professor in Seattle, Washington. So when we looked at the good life, we went back to Aristotle and Socrates and a lot of these people who I can't spell, but he studies and teaches about. And, and we looked at the good life, and we found that there were 4 characteristics that aren't often talked about, and these are the 4. And we're saying that well-being or health and money are part of it, but place, people, right work, and purpose are the 4 pillars of the good life that we studied and started to measure with a good life inventory. Are you living in the place you love? Place matters. It matters not only for weather, but for community. Many adults who retire and move someplace move back within a year or 2, or they balance it out because of other factors of place. Secondly, people. You could be living in the most beautiful place and be feeling alone or feeling like this isn't your, you know. Have you ever been on a vacation and had an argument with somebody you were with, and all of a sudden the place kind of goes into the background, and well, sometimes that happens. So are you living in the place you love with people you love, doing work you love? Now, work is a broad category called a calling in certain ways. Not just a job, not just a career, but something where you use your gifts for the sake of others in certain ways, with purpose. So pause, and then I'll pull things together here. One more conversation with the person you were talking with before. Are you living the good life? In your definition, not mine, but place. Are you living in the place with the people, doing the kind of, it could be creative work, it could be volunteer work, it could be hobby work, it could be caregiving, it could be a whole lot of different things that go into right work. You know, in Christian beliefs, we talk about stewarding talents. Buddhists talk about, have other, I just talked, when I was teaching a couple of weeks ago in Costa Rica, Jack Kornfield was there, who's a Buddhist teacher and, written a lot of really great books like After Enlightenment, The Laundry is one of his books, and, things like that. He was teaching about what we're talking about here from a Buddhist perspective. And so there's all kinds of ways to look at life and to bring ourselves forward into that life. So I'm going to share one practice with you and then see if you have some questions. But first of all, just turn and very quickly say, yeah, I think I'm living the good life. The area that maybe is a struggle or maybe not is this. But just a quick check-in, because peer-to-peer listening here, peer-to-peer conversation is where it's really at. This is the bottom line. So just a quick conversation with those people, and then I'll pull things together. Take another minute. Okay, let's get back together. Thank your partners. So, how do I grow and give? How do I live my own version of the good life? So, on that same trip to Denver, I went into the Tattered Cover bookstore. If you've ever a fan of independent bookstores, it's one of the better ones, and it's in Denver. And I walked in, and at the information desk, I asked the lady behind the information desk, I said, "Can you tell me where the personal growth, the self-help section is?" And she said, "Oh, if I tell you, won't that defeat the whole purpose?" It's very good. But I went back to the self-help, what they call it personal growth in this store, and there's just like the whole wall or more of new, and all kinds of people there looking for the answer to how do I live the good life, or how do I grow, and all that kind of thing. So here's one answer. I call it the napkin test. I also call it the Got a Minute School of Coaching, because in this line of work that I'm in, people will say, "Richard, you got a minute? Can you tell me what to do with the rest of my life?" And I said, "Well, if you only got a minute," which we have here, "take out a napkin and write this formula down. This is the answer. This is the solution, and it's using your gifts on things you really care about and value in environments that value you and your voice equals your calling." And calling is another word, a discernment word for purpose. Do you know what your most enjoyed gifts are? Gifts have these 4 characteristics when I think about them, because people say, "Well, I don't have gifts. I'm not a gifted pianist. I'm not a gifted this or that." They always, comparison, as the Dalai Lama said, comparison is the cause of suffering. We compare ourselves with others in terms of their gifts or these and my gifts, but everybody is born with gifts, natural tendencies, and gifts are things that, first of all, you love doing. Why go for pain? Secondly, and your hand turns to it naturally and effortlessly. Second, others observe you doing it rather nicely or effortlessly. And third, you can't remember learning it. I don't know, I don't have a degree in it. That wasn't how I grew up, but you've always been that way. How many of you have brothers and sisters? Are your brothers and sisters' gifts the same as yours? My brother and I are so different, I can't even believe we were in the same family, And how did that happen in the same environment in certain ways? We all have gifts differing in certain ways. What are your gifts, and are you helping others discern their gifts? Looking at not just what should you do for a job to make money, but what are your real gifts? What do you love to do? Because if you don't love to do it, you're not going to get better at it. And you need to get better at things in order to master it in today's world. So gifts, passions, and values, the napkin test. I did this with a guy who saw my PBS special, and I was flying to London to do a speech pre-COVID. And he was sitting next to me, and he'd seen the PBS special, and he literally said, "You got a minute?" And I said, "You can see I'm writing a speech, and I have to give this speech at noon after we land. We're going to land at 6-something in the morning on this flight in Amsterdam, and I need to work on this and then take a nap, so I'm ready to go." And he kept bugging me, and I said, "Take out that napkin and write this down." And he wrote down this, and then he stayed awake the rest of the night, I guess. And we got up and we were walking down in Heathrow, and he says, "God, this is I never thought of it. I never had a structure to think about it. I just lost my job. And I'm here to clean out my apartment, and he's in an international organization, and move back to the States, and I don't have a clue what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. Now I got to start. I'm going to look at my gifts, what I really love to do, on things I really care about, in environments where I value, and I wasn't valued in this last one. So this is a formula that I've written extensively about, and there's a lot of YouTube on this if you want to look at it in your own way. So, final here is, who's your purpose partner? I would not coach anybody, and Ron knows this. He wasn't a coachee of mine, but he knows some people that were, unless they had a sounding board. Do you have a sounding board? You know, like a kitchen cabinet. People, if you get a kerfuffle in your life, it's those people you talk with, or you might even celebrate with them in certain ways. But when I talk about a sounding board, I talk about 4 people on your sounding board. Number 1 is a purpose partner, what I call a committed listener. Who's your committed listener? When you need to really talk it over, who really gets you without fixing you? You know, there's plenty of people who want to fix you. You know, they practice cure as opposed to care. Well, a committed listener practices the opposite, care. Tell me more about that, rather than, well, if I were you, what I'd do. It's like, well, you're not me. So just help me figure out. Second person is a wise elder. Who are your exemplars for you as wise elders? So maybe older than you, and they're good models for vital aging, purposeful aging, things like that. Not just because they've lived a long life, but because of the quality of their life and what they bring to life, including with you. Third is a wise younger. Who's a wise younger in your life who might ask you different questions, might have a different perspective on life? So I think we need to be, in many ways, an intergenerational world and learning from both. One of my people that endorsed the book and his stories in the book is a guy named Chip Connolly. And he talks about being a mentor and intern. Isn't that a great idea? Not just a mentor passing on the wisdom of others, but an intern learning from others at the same time. That is growing, being a mentor and an intern, and that sort of thing. And the fourth person on your sounding board could be your pet. Your cat, your dog, your canary, whatever that you have this special relationship with and knows more about you than all the other people on the planet. But the key is, who's your purpose partner? That one person you can rely on and talk to, that is that committed listener. And as Vivek Murthy, who wrote the book together and says about the loneliness epidemic, he says in many ways we need intimate listeners, that's like a purpose partner. We need relational, there's our friends that we hang out with and do things with, and we need community. We need all 3 levels of that kind of listening and relationship. But purpose partner is where I end. So a final thing here, with an ending story, is I asked you, and I said I would remind you at the end, what is your purpose practice? Please give this a whirl, and let your purpose partner know. Write down, grow and give on a post-it, put it on your mirror, and give it a try, and see if it doesn't make a felt sense difference tomorrow when I'm going to make a difference in someone's life today. Not a big difference, it may be saying hello and stopping and saying, how are you doing in certain ways, and not asking them, what do you do? Or are you still doing? Or but actually listening in certain ways. So, final thing here is one of the stories in the book is about a man named Ed Rapp, R-A-P-P. Ed was a person who I coached and know, and he was about to be named the president worldwide of Caterpillar. You know Caterpillar, the big yellow earth moving? He was about to become the top dog in that organization. He traveled the world. He used to be a chief financial officer at Caterpillar. He did other things. And he was out running with his son Jay, and he noticed that his foot was dragging. And he kind of was wondering what that was all about, and he got it checked, went through a myriad of checks. Finally, at the Mayo Clinic, they diagnosed him with ALS. He immediately retired at the age of 57. He moved back to Raleigh, North Carolina, where he had a home, where he lives now. He's in his 6.5 years of his ALS diagnosis. And and I stay in contact with him. And his big P purpose when he got the ALS diagnosis was not just to go inward. he created a foundation called Live Strong versus ALS. To date, he has raised $17 million for ALS research. $17 million and growing. And he's on the boards of some of these ALS research, and he's really gotten behind it. That's his big P. His little p is this: every single day, 5 days a week, at 8 o'clock in the morning Eastern time, he coaches somebody who was just diagnosed with ALS. Could be a young person, midlife, or older person. And he says what they want more than anything else is just to be listened to. They're scared, and they cry, but he listens. And he doesn't cure, and there is not a cure, but he is there, and he says, Richard, this makes my day. I feel better, I feel more alive. It's part of the good life for me to serve and to continue serving in spite of my adversity. So I just leave you with that. We all have our adversities, we all have our choices, but purpose is a verb, it's an action. Purpose is a path that we choose to serve and do things in our own way, and purpose is practices. So I hope you got something out of today that was useful to your own practices, and I'll just stop here. I think I'm a little over the time limit, so I think what we'll do is, maybe a couple questions, and then I'm going to turn it back to Margaret, who's got something she wants to share with you. So questions, any questions or challenges or anything, it's always a bad news when there's lunch sitting back there and you say, well, now we'll take some questions. It's like, yes.
A comment and then a question. The comment is that my granddaughter for Christmas asked for a subscription to curiositystream.com.
Yeah.
And there's a story why she asked for it, but being a good grandfather, I decided to check it out before I gave it to her. We watch that every night. It just is filled with fun documentaries, and we're always learning. The question is,
By the way, John Hendricks, who created the Discovery Channel and created that, I took to Africa on a walking safari. And nobody in Africa knew that he was a billionaire and created the Discovery Channel, and he was like a little kid. He was so curious because we flew over there on his plane. My wife said, you'll never be happy again in a commercial flight. But the fact is, he embodies that curiosity. But go ahead.
The question is, you were talking about gifts, and you said that, different religions talk about that, and the Christian religion, I wasn't sure I heard with my hearing what it is. Were you saying talents? And if so, could you say
to serve.
To serve.
Yeah.
And you're saying that's in our Christian tradition, that's bringing that force forth and force as a part of what you're talking about here.
Yes.
Okay.
I think we have a question from one of our live stream participants. Sue, do you want to share what they've asked?
Thank you. The first one is, isn't it more difficult to peel a banana from the bottom?
I can take that one. No, it's way better. Yeah.
Well, I would say try it. At least you won't get all that under your nails and, rip this and that. It's much easier. And I've sat in Mahali National Forest below where Jane Goodall has, in Gombe, does her work with chimps, and watch chimps eat bananas, and they eat them from the bottom. So I figured, well, maybe they know something I can learn something from. Yeah.
I have one other question from the online chat, and that is, how, if at all, do purpose practices vary among different personality types? For instance, extroverts, introverts.
The only connection there that I can answer with is it's always beyond yourself. However you do it, it's about adding value to others in your own way, with your own gifts and your own passions and things like that. So I don't think it matters gender-wise. I don't think it matters in all these other categories. If your intention, your aim is honorable that way, to really sincerely make a difference just in listening. I look for purpose moments all the time, and I'm no saint, believe me. I do a lot of things that aren't so great, but at the end of the day, when I check in with myself, and I've just listened to somebody I didn't have to listen to, not somebody I was paid to listen to or, taught or something like that. It could be in the parking lot. It could be anywhere. It just makes me look at life and gives me more joy, more fulfillment. When you ask people, what do you really want? I just want to be happy. Well, happiness is an outside game. Purpose is an inside game. Purpose brings fulfillment, a form of happiness. And there's happiness to buy something you like or go to dinner or there's the external happiness. And positive psychology science today, they talk about, the outside being hedonistic and the inside being eudaimonia. I can never pronounce that exactly, but it's about the fulfillment that's lasting. Hedonistic happiness comes and goes, but fulfillment sticks, and in many ways, and gives us a sense of joy or happiness.
We have another question in the room here.
Hi, I have an interesting one for you. All right, so my wife recently, a year and a half ago, died from pancreatic cancer, but that's kind of besides the point. But I married into the Polish intelligentsia. She was from Warsaw. She was a pediatrician here in the U.S. Wonderful, But in her family, if you didn't have a PhD and you weren't on top of the class and you didn't have anything from the STEM, science, technology, et cetera, you were kind of a worthless person. And she grew up with that. But, sadly, she was born into the wrong family. She was my, incredible, I called her my Encyclopedia Britannica because she just knew about everything, and it was a pleasure. But she was not a happy person, and she really loved, inside of herself, she loved art, okay? She loved art, painting, she was a poet, she loved the woods, she loved the mountains, But in her family, hey, that's, being an artist, you're basically on the bottom of the barrel.
So what's
My question is, she had a lot of baggage, to do all this stuff. There's certain
Right.
baggage that we have that we have to transcend. That unfortunately she never was able to transcend. And so how do we transcend, basically, when the baggage is holding you back?
Well, everybody's an experiment of one. I don't do drive-by assessments, so it's different for all of us. But Carl Jung said this. He said the greatest damage you can do to others, including your kids, is your own unlived life. So the starting point is to live from the inside out yourself, not force it on other people, but to be fully you, authentically you, with your gifts, passions, and values as a starting point. Other than that, she may have needed some help. I don't know, but I wrote a book, I'll proudly say, that sold over 1 million copies. It's called Repacking Your Bags, Lighten Your Load for the Good Life. So lightening your load means setting down what you're carrying, looking inside at what really matters, and sometimes that's through a crisis. But to lighten your load means if your bag's full, there's no room for growth, there's no room for what's new. So lightening your load means, so I'll just share one funny anecdote, I think, and it's not to make light of her situation, but at all. But during the PBS special, I talked about repacking your bags. And I said, go home tonight. Now, we're talking about people all over the planet watching this. They're not in the room. Well, there's 500 of them in the room watching it, but I said, go home tonight and take one drawer in your house and empty that drawer and look at it. It could be a junk drawer, it could be a closet or something, and ask yourself, one box says, I need this for the next vision in my life. What's next in my life? I need this. Those old phone cords that don't work with your phone anymore, those old glasses and those old, they go in there. The second box is so the first one is I need it. Second one is I definitely don't need it. Third one is I can't decide, but I'll put the date a year from now and I'll park it and I'll check it out. And if I haven't opened the box for a year, then the answer. And I get, to this day, emails from people. I started with a drawer. I then went to a closet where I looked at all those old shoes and suits and ties and dresses and things that I'm never going to wear again. Well, maybe I'll need it for you. And then I ended up selling my whole house. Because I realized I actually started with something really tangible, And then I realized also I need to unpack my calendar to look at how I'm spending my time and who I'm spending my time with. And, no is a complete sentence. Who do I need to say no to?
Right.
And then looking at, other aspects of calendar, and it's not just about the stuff, it's about how we spend our most precious time and things like that in our relationships. So, thank you again, and Margaret, I'll turn it back to you. Okay. Do you need this?
Oh, do I need this? Yes, I'll go one more slide here. Thank you very much, Richard. This was absolutely wonderful. I really, really appreciate this presentation. I was scribbling notes furiously during it, and I'm just so grateful that you were here. We had one of the things that I love about Third Age is the way that it's sort of becoming this community in its own right. And we had a really lovely idea that was suggested by a new member of Westminster who's kind of new to Third Age. She said, this is going to be really interesting stuff, and I bet there's some people in the room who would want to continue the conversation. Would it be possible to start a book group coming out of this, and maybe start with one of the books that you and David Shapiro have written? It would be a self-directed book group. The Westminster staff would happily set you up, but then you would gather yourselves. So if anybody is interested in doing this, we have a sign-up sheet. I think Scott's got it at the back table there. Put down your name and your email address and whether you'd prefer to be in person or online. Our upcoming small group experience at Westminster, we're going to be doing something called Church in the Round for Lent, so keep an eye on that. But after Lent is over, we might want to start a book group based on some of these really important questions. So if you're interested, sign-up sheet is over there. I'm going to take us into sort of what's next for Third Age, and it turns out that I'm what's next for Third Age. So in 2 weeks' time, I'll be leading a Third Age conversation about Bible stories and what they mean to us. One of the things that I was thinking about as I was listening to Richard's presentation was my own sense of purpose. And one of the things that has given me the most purpose and the most joy is sort of this position of being at the intersection of Scripture and community. I love being a pastor because I love Scripture and I love people, and I love that my job kind of puts me right in the mix, right in between. And for this one in particular, I've been working with the Adult Ed Council. We've been reading a book by Walter Brueggemann about the relationship between the canon, the biblical canon, and Christian education, Christian formation. One of the points that he makes is that in the Jewish tradition, it is always a young person asking the elders questions. Questions like, what do these stones mean, right? The statue that Joshua built on the banks of the Jordan after the Israelites cross over. Or questions like, why is this night different from all other nights? At the time of the Passover, right? The commemoration of the Exodus. And I kind of want to borrow that model with this group. And I want to run a sort of participatory Third Age section in which I get to ask you, what do the stories of Scripture mean to you? Who brought them alive for you? How has your relationship with Scripture changed over time? I'm really curious to hear that, so I hope that you'll join us on February 8th. You don't have to be a Bible thumper to come to this one. And I am really, one of the things I love about Westminster is just the range of relationships to Scripture that we have. During March, we won't have a Third Age program. As I said, we'll be doing something called Church in the Round for Lent. It's a small group opportunity. You'll be hearing more about that in the newsletter and during announcements in worship. But then we'll come back in April and talk about a very concrete and tangible thing, housing options in the Third Age. We'll have Cynthia Johnson with us for that program. So I'm really excited about what's ahead for Third Age. What's ahead for us today is lunch. Lunch is over there at that table in the back. We're asking for a $5 donation if you're able to contribute that. I know many of you have already done so online. If that is a stretch for your budget, just enjoy lunch. We're really grateful that everybody is here. I'll say a quick prayer and then I'll let us go. So let's pray. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for the gift of wisdom. We thank you for this time together. We thank you for Richard and his purpose and his work. And we thank you for this community that brings us together. We ask your blessing on this food, all those who prepared and served it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, did I remember it all, Sue? Okay, we're good to go. Enjoy your lunch.
Yeah, yeah, right.